All right. Hello, everybody who has joined us tonight for our Adolescent Open House. My name is Sam O'Brien. I'm head of school here at Great River School. And while you're not at Great River School Live, we are here to give a virtual presentation about the Adolescent program here at Great River. And then later this evening, we'll have from 8:45 to 9:15 p.m., hopefully after an elementary bedtime, or at least late enough that it's smoother for you all, an elementary focused Q&A. So we do have a presentation to get through that often gives a bit of background. For anyone who's here and has a specific question, I would love to invite you to use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And if you've just joined or just been just logged on, make sure that Q&A, it's a little dialog box at the bottom of the screen, is where you can put your question. If you have any technical challenges, let me know with the chat or even in the Q&A. And if you would like to speak your question out loud, just raise your hand the way mine is. And so you can, oh, there we go. You can raise your hand though by looking at your avatar down at the bottom and raising your hand, and then I can allow you to talk. So without further delay or ado, I don't see any questions coming in yet. And so I'm going to give a very succinct presentation about Great River School and what our goals are and what our values are here as a school. So thank you for joining us tonight. And here is our open house info session. We are a Montessori learning community. We're a public school, and our goal is to prepare students for their unique roles as responsible and engaged citizens of the world. Our school vision is to achieve world peace through education. That's the vision of Maria Montessori when she started her method of education over 100 years ago. And as students enter our school, we aim to give them an experience in which they have multi-age experiences. So we have 4 levels of the school, each in 3-year age groupings. Our lower elementary and upper elementary are grades 1, 2, and 3 in the lower, and 4, 5, and 6 in the upper elementary. That's a traditional Montessori environment where in each classroom, there are about the same number of students in each grade. And then in the lower adolescent program, grades 7 and 8 share classes, experiences, and time together. Grade 9 does have leadership positions and interaction with the lower grades, but is a transition year between the experience of 7th and 8th grade and the readiness for high school. And so grade 9 advisories are all 9th grade advisories together, and are really a part of the high school while getting an experience focused on the needs and developmental characteristics of a 9th year student. In our upper adolescent program is grades 10, 11, and 12 together in advisories, together in elective classes with 9th year students. And then 10th year is really, again, getting some attentive preparation for the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program, which happens at the 11th and 12th grade levels for all students at Great River School. We do have key experiences, which are overnight trips we use to build trust and interdependence. We also hold weekly community meetings to practice listening and solving conflict. And then we do schoolwork, emphasizing the concept of a growth mindset for ourselves and our learning. We aim to build an attitude of lifelong learning with this growth mindset. And specifically, a growth mindset is the belief that intelligence and skill can be developed, meaning if I don't have a skill or a comfort with an area of learning or with a practice or with even something as playful as an instrument or a sport or a game that we're playing at school, that I can be curious about that, I can go into it and develop it. And by embracing challenges and then facing setbacks with an eye of curiosity, I'll develop the skills to respond to that. That's very different than what's called a fixed mindset of learning. A fixed mindset would be declaring that I'm good or bad at math, or I'm just not good at handwriting. That kind of excusing attitude toward a challenge or toward an area where I'm uncomfortable is something that's very common in our society and our vocabulary. And in terms of a growth mindset, we find that having a growth mindset prepares students for challenges and also prepares them to think creatively and act creatively in response to challenges. So why do students succeed here? Well, we have a program that emphasizes personal responsibility, work, and respect for self and others. The idea of interdependence, that we are all necessary, required, and rely on each other for support, is essential for our school and the work that we do here. Our community here means a commitment to shared responsibility, that we would expect discomfort, we'd expect to learn by letting go of something we want personally in order for the whole group to benefit. Also, community means respecting the contributions of every individual and seeing every person and voice as necessary and essential. Community doesn't mean that everyone here is your favorite friend or your best friend. Community does mean that everyone receives dignity, everyone is respected and respects each other, and that everyone understands how to show up, both respecting others and the shared responsibility we have to take care of this place. So as a family, as a student expecting to go to Great River School or interested in attending Great River School, we enter with the understanding that every year we are caring for the community that's here and building a successful community with our actions, with our words, and with the way that we understand our responsibilities. So we do learn skills at Great River, skills of resilience, understanding, and the ability to work in a group. We also build experiences and the capacity to try new things, like the growth mindset I was talking about, and being open to experiences that might be uncomfortable at first. We learn personal responsibility through chores, through work plans, and through relationships that matter to each other. We also learn academics. Yes, we participate in the teaching of state standards, and we go beyond state standards. We also administer standard assessments, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment as an example, that all public schools are mandated by the state to carry out. We focus for hello, everybody who's still there. I have a suspicion that I may have dropped out. So I'll just pick up from where we left off. I'll be sharing my screen again. And if anyone could be so kind as to tell me if in fact I did drop out of your presentation, please do let me know in the chat or the Q&A. So we'll just pick up from where I left off. We are a public school that uses materials for students to learn concepts. The Montessori materials, the Montessori trained teachers that we have, and the hands-on curriculum that we have. Oh dear, thank you for your patience, all of you who stuck around. It's rare in an in-person event that all the lights would go off and we'd be silenced. It is rare also that our Zoom would fail. However, it's not unheard of completely. Thank you for your patience and for sticking with us. We will, just for anyone who may have left, we will have this recording up on our website for, I think by Friday. So make sure to put your questions in if you have them, and I'll carry on and wrap up our presentation, formal presentation real quick. The hands-on work though that we offer through curriculum and materials to our adolescents and to our elementary students focus on personal responsibility, making an individual work plan, and then at the grades of 11th and 12th, all students engage in the IB curriculum. An IB curriculum fits a year of college curriculum into 2 years of high school. So basically, every 1 year of high school IB course is like a semester-long college course. And colleges around the country and world recognize the challenge and also the holistic nature of the IB program, and that it really asks students to engage not only in what they're thinking, but how and why they're thinking about it. And so this opens up opportunities for adolescent students regardless of their prior perceived aptitude or potential. So at our school, someone who struggled with academics in 7th, 8th, or 9th or 10th grade even would still enroll in IB courses. And we have found over 14 years of offering IB curriculum and over 12 years of being a certified IB school that students rise to the abilities and rise to the challenges of the IB curriculum. And we've also become experienced at accommodating different entry points and readiness points for an 11th year student to really succeed in engaging in that curriculum. All students engage in this college level coursework because we support individuals to meet challenges, and that students who would do IB at a conventional school do really well here. Also, students who would never have engaged in the IB also do well by engaging in that work and succeeding. And our teachers are really adept also at meeting students where they are at and supporting them to get to success. School transportation is a functional question that many people ask about. Specifically at the elementary level, we offer school buses, yellow school buses that go around St. Paul and the periphery of St. Paul to pick up students. But for adolescent students in grades 7 through 12, one important thing to note is that we offer Metro transit tickets for Metro buses. And we also encourage students who live close enough to bike and walk. So all of our adolescent students, all 390 or so, 12 to 18-year-olds, if they want transportation through the school, which most of them participate this way, they have a Metro transit ticket that they use. It's free of charge if you live more than 2 miles away from the school, and you use that to take the Metro transit system to school. So it's common to see many, many students bus pooling together in groups and riding the city buses and arriving at school that way. We have limited school busing for elementary school students who need it, which means we focus on families who otherwise would not be able to attend Great River School and live in the St. Paul metro area, specific to St. Paul, the city of St. Paul and its boundaries, and some limited stops just outside the periphery. A typical day at Great River School goes in a regular year from 8:30 a.m. to 3:10 p.m. I won't talk in depth about the pandemic operations and the emergency operations we're using to operate school this year, but you can find all those details on our website. If you go to our website, greatriverschool.org/return. But an elementary typical day would look like a 3-hour work period, a beautiful lunch and recess outside that's about 45 minutes each for those, and then an afternoon work period. An adolescent typical day looks like 4 core classes, 2 electives, and an independent work period every day. Specifically, those classes may vary between direct instruction or presentation from a teacher, maybe 2 days a week, and the other 2 or 3 days a week would be independent work time or research for a student to develop a project and really get guidance one-on-one from that individual. We do have for the adolescent level, athletics, arts, clubs, and activities. There are a few limitations on that, however. As a small school, we partner with a couple other charter schools to do varsity athletics through the Minnesota State High School League. We also have some non-varsity State High School League athletics, such as ultimate frisbee or boys volleyball. And those are quite popular. So ultimate frisbee for all genders and boys volleyball as a recent addition. The arts clubs and activities are consistently heavily engaged in by Great River School students, and the ones that are listed here are the ones that are most consistent year to year. There are students every year who start new clubs and or carry on the traditions of these existing clubs. And so when a small school engages in these things, though, to be plain, we do have instrumental music, but we don't have an orchestra. We do have many, many fine athletics and athletic achievements and students who participate both in school sports and club sports widely in the region, but we don't have our own swim team or pool. We don't have our own track and field team that we populate only with Great River students. But we do have those opportunities generally through cooperatives with other schools, and or if we're unable to find a cooperative for a particular sport, working with a student to make sure the practice schedule through their club team might work well too. Also, in terms of our growth mindset academics, our students do demonstrate a clear ability to engage and work at a high level, and they develop that skill. So we hear from graduates that independent work, both succeeding at it and struggling with it at school, taught students the skills to go into the world and be independent. We also focus on meeting students' needs, and we take restorative measures in response to breaking agreements, or community agreements or contracts, and include recommitting to social norms and restoring one's place in the community, something that we call at our school, restitution, but it's not a restorative practice in terms of being the only response to, say, discipline or behavior. We do have rules, we do have expectations, and there are consequences. We also, though, beyond those expectations, rules, and consequences, have the expectation that we're going to work with any student to find a place to restore their place in the community. And what I see that does is it raises the ability of a student to both see themselves as valuable and necessary, and it follows through on the commitment that we made earlier in this presentation and as a school to valuing the contribution of each person. Our outcomes for students include higher rates of belonging as reported by students in comparison to other schools and typical averages both in the state and the nation. Students on national and state reports at Great River School in comparison report having more friends that can be trusted, reports more adults that can be trusted, and reports more confidence in adults speaking up for you or peers standing up for fairness and for you. We serve students well, and students succeed here because they build relationships, they care about their learning community, and they hold themselves and each other to high expectations, which makes it all the more important to understand that when we invest in the social emotional learning of trips and overnight trips and doing things that seem non-academic, especially early in the year, we have in mind that we know that that sets the foundation to succeed later. And so who checks up on us? Well, we have an authorizer. The state of Minnesota checks up on them. We are a public school, and we have to report all our academic outcomes, including standardized tests. And the next slides highlight proficiency and growth as measured by the comprehensive assessments. So these are all things I'm not going to go deeply into that you can look up. Great River here shown in the yellow, having higher reading proficiencies than other districts. But you can look these up on what's called the Minnesota State Report Card. So if you just Google that or look it up on the internet, any public school has all of its data there. Here you see Great River in comparison to St. Paul Public Schools or the state as a whole, how many students are making medium and high growth. I see that we have more students making high growth in particular because of the independent work and the independent work journal that students keep and how students get one-on-one attention and I think really efficacious learning coaching from their teachers. I also want to touch though on the idea that our school in terms of mathematics performance shows generally our 11th years outperform peers, but as a whole, we tend to be just below the state and generally above resident district comparisons. I do believe that other schools and St. Paul Public Schools being no exception can be excellent places for students. And the goal in showing these comparisons is to show that we do have evidence that our hands-on, heavy emotional relationship investment, emphasis on belonging and experiences and responsibility approaches, that those approaches really pay off in students making high growth and students making a real concerted investment in their growth and their work as a student. One thing I also want to touch on just before I get to the questions being asked would be just to put it as plainly as possible. If you look at all the schools in St. Paul, especially the public schools, and you look at Great River School by ethnicity, one might say, why are there so many white students here? The neighborhoods of the north end of Frogtown, of Hamlin Midway are not predominantly white. And Montessori is not an educational system designed for or most effective for white kids. And so what keeps this school an outlier as compared to either the city of St. Paul by ethnicity or St. Paul Public Schools shown here on the left by ethnicity? And what I want to just talk directly to is that we do live within a society right now that is experiencing, as we saw this past year with the uprising after the murder of George Floyd. And then also I would identify the real public and plain, I think, reckoning with the long-term effects of systemic racism. A real need to talk plainly about the society we're living in right now is not an integrated or educationally equitable society. Generally, schools are not integrated in terms of having an equal representation from our society or reflecting the neighborhoods they're in. And we don't want to be a part of that tacit and quiet participation in segregation. And we don't want to be a segregated school. Specifically, we actively seek to recruit lottery applicants from neighborhoods and families that are underrepresented at Great River School. And as compared to the demographics of our neighborhoods, what we have are the indicators that we are making progress in those areas, whereas the first year students and the students that we do pull in from the lottery show a higher degree of both socioeconomic and then in a separate category, racial diversity. We do see that recruiting both Black, Brown, and Indigenous students, and then also really speaking to the values of those students and their families is something that we are engaged actively in trying to both improve and then amplify our communication with families so they understand that we are here for all students of our neighborhood. Everyone when it comes to Great River School should know that we talk directly about race, racism, institutional oppression, and the curriculum that we use in our classes ask students to ask about the why of what's included or not included in a typical textbook. And then we also use primary source documents to look at not only treaty rights of Indigenous nations still residing in North America, we also look at primary source documents dealing with race and racism, dealing with the colonization of Minnesota and other places in North America. And then we actively talk about critical thinking skills around the reality of history, oppression, race, and culture in the United States and North America. So when we think, though, about educational equity, I want to be clear that in terms of committing to equitable outcomes for students, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their income, and regardless of their race, means that we have to pay attention to the race of a student and also other demographics that might institutionally, in terms of education in Minnesota, indicate that the student or their family or students like them may not have been treated well by the educational system in Minnesota. And so in another way to say, we pay attention to identity, race, ethnicity, demographic background, so that we can make sure that our outcomes are not predictable by race. We want to make sure the outcomes for a Black student at Great River School are equally excellent compared to the outcomes of a typical white student at Great River School. We want to make sure that the gap in access and equitable outcomes for academic achievement, which you see in Minnesota and in St. Paul Public Schools and Minneapolis Public Schools, and we see those patterns, if we don't pay attention to them, have in the past been present at Great River School. And so when we look at those equitable outcomes, we want to identify that when we look at student demographics, we want to be able to say that a Great River student in any of these categories is having a typical Great River School outcome in terms of, say, reading or math outcomes. We do see discrepancies, but those discrepancies is in comparison to outcomes, say, in the state as a whole or St. Paul Public Schools, are shown at Great River School to be much less. So more Great River School students who identify as Latinx or Black or African American or as part of the Asian Pacific Islander community have higher outcomes than they do at other schools typically. And then as we look at students on track for success in math, again, this is assessing growth in math, and then not only growth in math, but the ability to be predictably on track to meet or exceed state standards. And so again, we see at Great River School a more positive outcome than St. Paul Public Schools on the whole. And I just want to be clear here, the goal here is not to be critical of St. Paul Public Schools uniquely, but is to demonstrate that we do see indicators that what we are doing for students at Great River School does correlate to better outcomes for them in general in terms of educational equity and outcomes. Then in a separate category, I want to just talk about the very active LGBTQ plus community and the GSA at Great River School. So in part of the 4 respects that we have for self and others, our work in the environment, it translates to an environment where students are able to expect to be treated with dignity. And while all people deserve respect and dignity, we have active ally groups and affinity groups for students around gender and sexuality. And specifically, our student government has been active over the past 10 years in creating policies, not only around educational equity and outcomes, but even specifically around gender and equity outcomes. We do serve all students. We are a public school. We have very active and dynamic special education department that handles all students with IEPs. We serve students with 504s. We make specific accommodations, and we also serve English language learners. We do ask families to engage in meaningful conversations at home about interdependence and responsibility. We want you to take on chores. We want you to have chores for your student at home that are necessary for the upkeep of your household and the well-being of your family. We hold high expectations for students, and we need you as a family, as you enroll at Great River School, to ask how can you be part of a solution. That could be a solution for your child and your students' academic outcomes. It could be a solution for a challenge your student sees in their community, or it could be something you see at school that could improve, and we want you to come with ideas of how to improve that. We do offer parent education. We do offer systemic supports for students and interventions. And I really can't emphasize enough the idea that when you join Great River School as a family, you are a necessary part of the community. And that, I think, is a different approach and aspect than most schools. So with that, I'm just going to stop here and answer a few of the questions that have come up. So thanks for everyone who's put a question forward. And again, if you are interested in speaking, please raise your hand or otherwise indicate that you might be able to speak. This does become a bit of a more interesting dynamic when there are other voices present. So without further ado, when do we find out if we got a spot in the lottery? Thank you. We do hold our lottery at the end of this month, I believe on the 24th of February. So you have to fill out an application to be in the lottery. And one thing I know is true is that 100% of students enrolled at Great River School over the last 15 years, 100% of them filled out an application for the lottery. So just let that settle in. And then secondly, after filling out an application for the lottery, which you find on our website, we take all of the names per grade and we pull them out in order. And by making that ordered list, we then start at the very top. And if there's an opening in that grade, we call that person first. The only exceptions are that after we pull the ordered list, any student who's a sibling of a current student at Great River School would then have priority. And then if a student is a dependent of an employee at Great River School, they would get next priority. However, generally we're taking new students, I know, in first grade, and then usually we have some students depart in 8th grade to go to a larger high school or make a transition for 9th grade. So we usually take in 9th grade students also. All of the other grades are really dependent on whether or not a student is departing Great River School. And while that is rare, sometimes families move. Sometimes for a rare reason, a student will depart and go to another school. And if that happens, then we do have a wait list at each grade, at least historically. So you find out you got a spot in the lottery about 2 weeks after we pull all those numbers, though you are able to watch the lottery live and see your associated number being pulled. And so if you got questions about that, let us know. I just gave a lot of information that didn't give you an exact answer. And the shortest answer is we call you if you have a chance to enroll at Great River School. And if you enter the lottery and you don't hear from us in the first 2 weeks, that doesn't mean anything. Everyone gets a notice with their number and their spot on the wait list for that grade within a month of our lottery. The likelihood of in-person learning next year, I think, is very high. And in particular, we're working toward in-person learning for our elementary school right now. And I think regardless of how in-person learning goes at other big schools this year or at other big school districts, we're likely to see, I think, developments in the pandemic, both with vaccination and with the effectiveness of mitigation techniques that we've been using on campus already this year, that not only our school, but many across Minnesota will be mandated by the state to offer in-person learning unless there's a real exception required for a family or a student. Now, that's my prediction. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that the state, the Department of Health and Education are really working diligently to set reliable standards. And so I think that it's highly likely that we'll be engaged in in-person learning. Now, I think that also means that some families and students will not necessarily be 100% comfortable returning in person, and there could be the possibility that distance learning is still offered as an option, though at this point, I can't make commitments as to what that looks like. I just think that it's most likely that we are in-person learning on our 3.5-acre campus in St. Paul on Energy Park Drive, and that most students will probably be wearing masks, will probably be participating in safety and mitigation standards at school, including hand washing and making sure things are clean, and then likely eating in small groups. But even so, I think that's what fall will look like. And then how many kids per grade on average? On average, we have between 63 and 65 students per grade, 1st through 12th grade, which, like I said earlier, is about 780 students school-wide. How well do students do who have not participated in Montessori in lower or upper elementary if we're transitioning to our 9th through 12th grade program? So I will say this, students typically do very well. And in particular, if students were doing well at another school, they step into Great River School and continue to do well in school. They often enjoy the sense of, I think, camaraderie and independence that comes with our learning environment. And then if students have not even done well previously, it does take often some adjustment time to understand what we're asking for, but the invitation to have a conversation and about a project or an assignment, and then take that on responsibly, is something that I see really pays off for students. And then even if you didn't have Montessori before age 12 or before age 15, entering our school, I think really goes well for most students. Now, the only one specific exception I would say is that if you are a student who really likes to know how many points is this assignment worth, and how quickly can I get it done and just get my responsibilities taken care of, or how can I just get 100% and be done with my schoolwork, it may be frustrating to you to do a really great job on assignment, to give it to your teacher or your guide, as we call them, and then have that person look it over, congratulate you on your hard work, and then ask you where you think you could improve. And when you identify a couple places you could do more, to get that work back to improve on it. And so that's part of the growth mindset that we've been emphasizing. And I have seen for students who have really made a formulaic or systemic sort of approach to their schoolwork before coming to Great River, if their idea of school is how to get it done efficiently and get it over with, it can be frustrating to be invited into really considering and thinking about your work more and more that we do at Great River. However, that doesn't mean that adjustment can't be made, and we are used to helping students, I think, really enjoy revising their work, going deeper into their work in a way that they may not have been invited to previously. Those are the questions for the night. I'm just gonna give a notice to folks who are still here that if you'd like a question answered, we have a few more minutes that will be here. Thank you to all of you who have endured our couple Zoom technical hiccups this evening. And if you came specifically with an elementary question tonight and you were holding back, it's okay to ask that. But if you have friends or yourself are looking for an elementary specific presentation, that will be in about an hour later this evening. One last thing that I wanted to identify is that especially as we are going through this year of pandemic as a public school in Minnesota, I see that one thing that our adolescent students really are enjoying is the sense of responsibility to themselves and others that they're sharing, even in digital connection or this kind of Zoom group, that new 9th graders, new 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and even new 7th and 8th graders this year who are new to Great River School, didn't have acquaintances or friends at the school before this year, have reported on the whole, and when we took a mid-year survey, I believe it was 85% of our new students reported feeling a 5 out of 5 in terms of comfort and being welcomed into the school. And then also hearing both anecdotally and then seeing in the data reported that their peers really went out of their way to welcome new students in, to ask them if they had questions, and then to support them in terms of integrating into the community and really being a part of the learning community. There's an important question I see here that has just been asked in the chat. And the question is race and or other identity criteria considered when the lottery is happening. So for instance, would racial identity other than white, or would a physical or learning disability, or would status as free and reduced lunch family affect your place in the lottery? And the short answer there is no. The lottery, as mandated by the state of Minnesota and the legislature, does not take into account any part of the student's identity. So not address, not income, not race or ethnicity. And so for even for a student who may have disabilities or may identify other than a group that's already underrepresented at the school, we are not legally able to take any steps to give certain preferences to certain students in the lottery process. So it's a completely open lottery, and the way the legislature, from their perspective, the way to make it most fair is to only take a student's name and not to use any other identifying criteria. Can you give us a sense of how many kids come from the other side of the river, quote unquote? Well, as a person who has lived in Minneapolis for about a decade, and however grew up in St. Paul in the 80s and 90s, I have St. Paul aunts and uncles who, in fact, I don't think to this day have crossed the river into Minneapolis. And I joke, I'm not even joking. But how many students come from, I would say this, outside of the St. Paul area? At this point, as many. I think our unique school offering and being one of the only Montessori high schools in the country, but also then being one of just two 1st through 12th grade Montessori public schools means that we really do draw folks from a lot of zip codes. So we have over 64 zip codes currently enrolled at the school, and I believe over 78 zip codes applied last year to enroll. So it's not just students coming from the other side of the river from St. Paul, it's students coming from north and south and far east and far west. So if you live in Minnesota, you are allowed to apply to attend Great River School. But we do limit our transportation generally to St. Paul and the outlying areas of St. Paul to pick up students to bring them in. We have limited bus stops in Minneapolis, and it's not a guarantee every year that we could continue that in Minneapolis. Can you tell me a little bit about how you support your staff and teachers in professional development? What does your staff retention rate look like? So generally over the last, say 15 years, our staff retention on average is just a few points higher than the state average. And our staff retention in terms of staff satisfaction, we do have 85% of our staff report a highly, they completely agree that Great River School has been a great place for them to work. And even 7 out of 10 of our staff are willing to recommend to a friend or a family member that they should work at Great River School also. So we use those as metrics to try to indicate staff satisfaction. Specifically, our staff professional development involves sponsorship for anyone who wants to pursue Montessori training. It also involves right now, and for the past 7 years, a real deep focus on educational equity, cultural understanding, and cultural competence. And so, and then really addressing the language of white supremacy and the effects of institutional white supremacy and oppression on teaching practices and on our ability as adults to have strong relationships with students. And so that goes for white folks relating to white folks, so folks who might appear like me on your camera, and that goes for white teachers and how they relate to non-white students. And then for Black, Indigenous, and teachers of color and how they relate both to their profession, to their students, and to their colleagues. And so really supporting people to be comfortable with that language and addressing that challenge of education. How many applicants do you normally receive for 9th grade? Typically somewhere between 60 and 150 9th graders might apply to be enrolled. I believe this year we did take in 15 new 9th graders. And on a typical year, it's anywhere between 3 and say 15 or 18 9th graders might be new to the school. And so it really depends on how many 8th years leave. And then we do have a few spots that for sure will be new for next year. All right, well, thanks for the second round of questions. and we started just a few minutes late. It is the ending time. As I say my last few words here, anyone who's got one last dying ember of a question that you want to get in, please feel free to put it into the Q&A. And for those of you who are watching the recording, I want to thank you for your time and your energy. And if you've got any questions about Great River School that we haven't answered tonight, please feel free to send them to enroll, ENROLL, at greatriverschool.org, and we'll be sure to get you all the information you need. For any of you who are considering an application, but perhaps apprehensive about how likely it is to be enrolled, it is important to fill out the application. And again, it just simply asks for a student name and then contact information of a guardian or the family member. And it's really important to fill that out, regardless of what you think your chances are of being enrolled. This year especially, I know that we have had spaces in the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grades, as well as 12th grade. We have also enrolled students in 2nd, 5th, 7th grade throughout the year. And so that is really based on who is applied and then who is on our wait list. And so that offer can happen in February or March. It can also happen in April or May or August, or even next year in September or October or December. And so you got to apply in order to be on the wait list. And I'll just really encourage everyone to make sure you do that. The deadline to do that is the 17th of this month, but I'll encourage you to just do it right now. Take a moment, go to our website and enroll. And then when you enroll in our lottery, we pick all your names in order, and then we'll call you if there's a chance to enroll for your student. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. May you be well, and remember to care for those you love, and remember to get to know those you don't know yet. Take care. Bye.